Good morning, everyone. It's Jeff from Rust Bucket Valley Garage. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Kia 2013 that we had to take and put an engine in, and what it took to take and get the engine out and get the engine back in. This one right here is really sandwiched in there. So when these are made at the factory, there is an engine cradle that is a big steel structure underneath, and the transmission and the engine are assembled onto that, and then they're put up through the bottom of the car with the front suspension, and that's how they take and get the engine out. Here we generally take the engines out the top. To take and do that, we need to take and strip the engine down as much as we possibly can. So the first thing to come out is the battery, because we don't want to take and mess up the engine control module. It's a very expensive repair. That's over $1,000. So we want to take and isolate that. And also there's a tray underneath this that has to take and come out as well. In addition to the battery and the battery tray coming out, the induction system, which is this piece here, and the air box, and this piece coming over to the induction system for the engine, that must come off as well as the engine cover. The engine cover just snaps right off. The next thing we took out was we went ahead and we drained all the oil and we drained all the coolant out of the engine, and then we took the electric fan out, which is right here. You do not have to take and remove the radiator in this one particular model, but with the hoses and everything out of the way, then you have lots of access. The next thing to take and come out is all the wiring and all the hoses that go onto the engine, which are underneath this cover here. They're not too bad. The plugs only go one place. There's probably about 15 plugs for the engine to take and run all the sensors and everything. The next thing to come off would be the intake manifold. There are 8 bolts that hold that on, and the whole assembly comes off really easily. Next thing to come off would be the 2 heater hoses. They're buried down in this area here, and also this assembly right here, which underneath goes to the backfire valve. The next thing that has to come off is his oxygen sensor right here, and I showed you in one of the earlier videos how to take and make a socket to take and get in there, because there's a real small distance between the flats on the oxygen sensor itself and this little well that's right here. It's kind of a heat shield around the sensor so it doesn't cook it. Next thing that has to come off is the shield on the exhaust manifold. There are 4 bolts holding that on. They're 10 millimeter. You have to unhook the wiring off here. The lower oxygen sensor, or the downstream oxygen sensor, can go ahead and stay in. This one here has to come out. There are 2 bolts down here, about 19 millimeter, that go to the flex exhaust, and that comes off. You take the 12 millimeter nuts off of here. There's 7 of those, and this whole assembly will come out. Then you will be left with the basically the bare engine block. The next thing that you have to take off is the alternator bracket, and the serpentine belt, of course. And then down way under here is the air conditioning compressor. You can take the air conditioning compressor, leave it off to the side. We just put it a couple of tie wraps on it, tie wrapped it out of the way. Next thing you must do is remove all the shielding that is underneath the engine. There are 2 very large plastic panels, and there are 3 very long plastic brackets that have to come down, that they cover the entire underside of the car for airflow constriction, so the engine runs a little bit cooler. Once you take and get those panels down, the next thing you want to do is you want to unhook the flex plate, which is a sheet metal heavy-duty plate from the transmission. There is a small, and I mean about like this, plastic cover that is on the front of the transmission bell housing. You pop that little cover off with a screwdriver, and the 17 millimeter crankshaft bolt that is way down under here, it's very accessible from the bottom. You can turn that to take and line up the 4 bolts for the transmission flex plate to torque converter, and you pull those out. That will free the engine from the transmission. There are approximately 9 15 millimeter by about 2.5 inch bolts that hold the engine to the transmission. When you start taking those out, you want to take and block up the transmission, because the transmission will want to go to a downward angle. You must, to get this engine out, you must take and prop the transmission up at a slight angle, because you have to take and angle the engine block to get it out of this cavity, because, as I said, it's really wedged in here. So here is a motor mount. After you have the sling on here for the lifting mechanism, it's crane or engine hoist. You can go ahead and take the rest of the bolts out of the transmission, and you take this mount off. It is sufficient initially just to take this nut off here. You'll be able to take this and lift it up a little bit with the engine hoist, and then there is a bolt here, one back here, one back here, that hold the motor mount to the frame for additional access. You want to take those 3 out. When you take this engine from the top out of this engine compartment here, you angle it slightly toward the back, and it will disconnect from the transmission. If you have the transmission at a slight, or have it blocked up at a slight upward angle, and it'll just come right out. Obviously, to take and reinstall the engine, you want to take your donor engine that you've just pulled out of here for whatever reason that you got to change it, and you need to take and strip everything that you're going to need off of that engine and put it on your new engine. All of your sensors and everything. There'll be just a little bit of wiring. I said there'd be just a little bit of wiring for the fuel injectors, the knock sensor, and also the fuel rail pressure gauge, and that will come up right here in these 3 connectors. There's 2 millimeter bolt, 2 10 millimeter bolts that are right here and here, that you can take this whole bracket off. You can disconnect them from this side and just lay it back out of the way. This engine harness right here goes underneath here. There's more 10 millimeter bolts that are holding it. With all of this stuff out of the way, you can just lay that stuff right back over here. It'll give you a clear field. Okay? So hopefully I gave you a little bit of insight as to what it takes to do an engine job on one of these Kias. A lot of the Asian vehicles are the same way. You just basically strip the engine block down as far as you can get it. There are 1 or 2 that are extremely difficult, that you have to pull the cylinder head off before you can take and get the block out. But this one out here, it's kind of a 3-piece engine. It's a 2-part block, and then the cylinder head goes on top of that, and then you just go ahead and pull the whole thing out at one time. Hope I've given you a little bit of insight as to what it takes to do an engine job on this thing. I hope you have a wonderful day, and please subscribe, hit the like button, and we'd love to hear from you. Have a great day.